The Pig War: How a Porcine Tragedy Taught England and America to Share. Written by Emma Bland Smith. Illustrated by Allison J. This is a true tale about two mighty nations, an ill-fated pig, and a most unusual war. It is also a story about sharing. The date: June 15, 1859. The setting: a small but lovely island called San Juan, off the green coast of today's Pacific Northwest. Was the island American? Was it British? That depended on who you asked. The characters: a few dozen men who had gotten along okay, for the most part, for some years. What were they doing there? Well, the Brits were raising sheep for a powerful British corporation called the Hudson's Bay Company. The Americans? Most of them were former miners looking for a bit of land to settle down on. The mood about to change for the worst. On this spring day, an American settler named Lyman Cutler looked out his window and spied a large pig rooting in his potato patch. The pig was British, or at least its owner was. Now, the Brits and the Yanks were on fairly good terms. True, they'd fought a terrible war, America's War of Independence, nearly a century before. And then, about 30 years later, they'd clash again in the War of 1812. But since then, things had calmed down. They were, if not exactly friends, then at least polite rivals in the exploration and settlement of the West. But still, tempers can flare, and on this fateful morning, Lyman's did. Maybe Lyman hadn't had his coffee. Maybe he'd slept poorly. Maybe he was looking forward to boiling those potatoes for his supper. Maybe he was thinking of the many painful miles he'd rode to buy the potato seed. But for whatever reason, when he saw that pig, he got cranky. He acted without thinking, and the pig paid the ultimate price. Poor pig. Instantly, Lyman regretted his rashness. He hurried to the pig's owner, Charles Griffin, and offered to pay for the animal. A gleam in his eye, Charles asked Lyman for $100, and all would be forgiven. Simple, right? Not quite. $100 was an outrageous sum at the time. For that kind of money, a person could buy a nice plot of land. A farm laborer earned only about $200 per year. Lyman refused to pay. There is a better chance for lightning to strike you than for you to get $100 for that hog, he said. Charles was affronted. You Americans are a nuisance on the island, he bellowed. In Charles's eyes, the island was British. I consider it American soil, retorted Lyman. That was too much for Charles. By this time, he was more than a little cranky himself. He told an official, who threatened to have Lyman arrested and all his fellow Americans evicted from the island. The same day, Charles sat down and wrote to his boss, James Douglas, the governor of the Crown Colonies of Vancouver Island and British Columbia. That should do it, he figured. But those Yanks, they knew their way around a fountain pen too. They wrote a letter to General William Harney, the American military commander, and signed it, all 18 of them. Now, the two bosses, Harney and Douglas, may or may not have been cranky. We don't know, but we do know that they were both, it must be said, on the hot-headed side. Harney promptly dispatched a company of 64 men under the command of Captain George Pickett. The Americans must have sighed a breath of relief. Such a fearsome display of power would surely make the Brits back off. Simple, right? Not quite. Because just 2 days later, a British ship, highly armed, commanded by Captain Geoffrey Hornby and loaded with several hundred men, steamed into the bay. Oh dear, what started as a pig incident and turned into a pig argument was fast escalating into a pig situation. Pickett was nervous. Well, who wouldn't be? He was also, like his boss, a bit of a hothead. He asked for reinforcements, and hundreds more American troops joined Pickett's forces on the island. Hornby, though less of a hothead than his boss, the governor, likely felt a tad nervous himself at this point. 2 more British ships steamed in. Soon, the bay and the golden hills overlooking it teemed with British and American ships and soldiers, all on alert. From shore, building a fort for their cannons, the Americans recalled the last 2 wars they'd fought with Britain. So many young men killed, so many children orphaned. Did they want to suffer that tragedy again? From their ships, aiming their own cannons, they had 64 in all, the British pondered their tentative relationship with the United States. Did they want to reignite the hostile attitudes of the past? Both sides waited, anxious, wondering if a scuffle over a pig had gotten just a tad out of hand. The pig war was about to begin. Tense days passed. The British captain, Hornby, taking a risk, ignored the governor's orders to land Marines on shore. Brave fellow. Then, unsure what to do next, Hornby waited for his superior, Rear Admiral R. Lambert Baines. Another good move. Baines was even less trigger-happy than Hornby. When he arrived and heard about the situation, he exclaimed, or so they say, "Tut tut, no, no." Then he ordered his troops to sit tight and added, in so many words, "Hold your fire." Phew! On the American side, Lieutenant Colonel Silas Casey took over from Pickett. He, too, was admirably lacking in hot-headedness. He rowed out to one of the British ships and tried to talk things through. But still, neither side would back down. By this time, the government bigwigs had heard what was happening. A squabble over a pig in a potato patch was about to plunge the 2 nations into war. President James Buchanan, far off in Washington, D.C., was alarmed. So were the British officials. Buchanan sent a message. "Don't shoot." "Unless they shoot first," was the order, but in much fancier language. And with the approval of the Brits, the president dispatched a proven negotiator. Hastily, or as hastily as possible for a time when it took 6 weeks to cross the country, General Winfield Scott arrived to help the 2 sides work things out. General Scott, it will not be disputed, was the least hot-headed of the whole gang. He worked his magic. Maybe the soldiers missed their families. Maybe both sides had cooled off. Maybe General Scott was a persuasive speaker. Maybe all of the above. For whatever reason, the men put down their weapons, and the islanders agreed to share. Joint occupation, the officials called it. Following the agreement, most of the soldiers left. All but one of the warships sailed back out of the harbor. No more than 100 men on each side were allowed to remain. None of the artillery guns were ever fired, except one. On a landmark day in November 1859, as General Scott prepared to leave after negotiating for peace, the Americans gave him a one-gun salute, well deserved. And now it was time to share. Simple, right? Actually, this time, quite right. The residents established two bases, American Camp and English Camp. Together, they improved the island. They fixed the roads. They set up a bi-national patrol to keep order. They even attended each other's holidays. Every summer, the Americans celebrated the 4th of July and invited the British. Every May 24, the British threw a birthday bash for their queen, Victoria, and the Americans always joined in. The raucous games included horse racing, blindfolded wheelbarrow races, and balancing on a greased pole off the end of a ship. They knew how to have fun. Did Lyman participate in these good times? Probably. He was known as a fun-loving guy. Did he feel just a teensy bit embarrassed about all the fuss he'd caused? Let's hope so, for goodness sake. Today, San Juan is part of the United States. English Camp and American Camp are still there, flags waving, a reminder of the past. The island, it is true, is small, but what happened there was very, very big. Two countries worked hard to share, to look past their differences, and to get along. They did all that, and no one got hurt, except the pig. Thank you for listening to this great story. Let me know what other stories you want me to read out loud to you.